Greetings, internet. I want to talk about sustainability today. Fun times. I am usually not a really big fan of these discussions because I usually don't really like the people that are in these discussions, because though they are often very idealistic, and that's a good thing, they're not very realistic, and their solutions towards these problems are annoy me. However, that does not take away that this is actually quite a serious issue, and I think that it should be discussed in more places. So here's my attempt. The current economic system of most developing countries relies very heavily on fossil fuels and mainly oil. At some point that is going to run out. We also have a quite fast growing global population. In the next 10 years there's supposed to be another billion, so that's a lot. And many areas in the world face problems because of this, because they're either too crowded or they don't have enough resources to feed all these people and to give all these people proper living conditions, and that's an issue. So if I would have to define sustainability, it wouldn't be just the economic system that we currently have. It is also definitely world poverty, food supplies. It's sort of the whole thing, because ideally we could still be using this planet in like 200 years. In the newspaper that I showed you yesterday, this is an article about economic development and how, according to this author, it should be. And he makes a really interesting comparison to the Vikings in Greenland in the late medieval period. They had a pretty awesome civilization in Greenland, but it was based on cattle that they would raise and then eat. However, then the small ice age came along and the grass disappeared, and therefore the cattle died, and then they died because they couldn't adapt to other ways of sustaining themselves, like the Inuit, the other people that lived there, did as they moved to fishing. Very rigid cultural values stopped the Vikings from doing so. And I think some of that might actually be happening to the developed world today. Because in general, but more specifically in the US, I think everything is sort of focused on oil and cars mainly. We need cars to get to our jobs, and then most other things are also, you know, heating, production lines. It's all sort of fossil by fuels, and at some point we're gonna have to make a change, and we do not want to end up like the Vikings. So a book that's sort of touching on the subject is Planet of Slums by Mike Davis. I really recommend this book. It's really interesting, though it is also very depressing at times, because it talks about all the issues that are currently existing in slums worldwide, and they are really freaking large. There's the issue of wage management, there's simply the issue of space, there's the issue of food and water, sanitary conditions. Like, everything is just sort of going wrong in many places of the earth, where people live under conditions that are just too horrendous and like literally living in shit all the time. I don't know all the solutions, but I do think that it's important for people to remain open and to remain searching for the solution or solutions to these issues, because I cannot imagine that we as a world are okay with this. One of the solutions that the author in the article proposes is that we move to a more circular economy, as he phrases it. Currently we have a linear economy where raw materials are produced into a product which is then consumed and then thrown away. That way we lose a lot of valuable raw materials, especially when they're very rare. For example, phosphor that is needed for agriculture is just like floating to the sea. If we could find a way to be much more focused on recycling, we could solve these issues. So instead of waste, they would be transformed into new products, and you would get a circle. I think this sounds pretty amazing. I also think this is really far from being reality. Girl can dream, can't I? I think the author in this article is right that in order to make this switch, we also have to switch our values about what we consider as being rich and as what we consider desirable to have. You have all these new economies that are in competition with us, like China and India and Brazil, and if you look at all the people in the world, we can never all own as much as we currently own. Even for people who are very much aware of this, it is really hard to change because there isn't really an alternative at the moment. And the question is, would there be a market for these alternatives? If we're realistic, the only way it is ever going to change is if people can make money out of it. Value shifting is a very vague term, and it's not something that you can very easily create in a society, because it depends on so many different factors, and it's different in every single country. You know, what are status symbols? It depends on what other people think. However, I do think that there are sort of developments in that direction, are really good sort of beginnings, but it's not really gonna change anything in, you know, the big scheme of things. This is definitely where I get stuck if I take courses in this, because it seems like you can never do it completely right. If you look at the example of food, you can buy biological food, you can buy fair trade food, you can buy locally produced food, and which one is the best? These contradict sometimes. Like, for example, fair trade might not be biological, or healthy food might have a very high sort of energy level in able to produce, like a lot of dairy products. It is really complicated to do the right thing. It's not gonna happen because they're just gonna walk into a supermarket and pick whatever they can find. And the same goes for clothing stores. Like, I just bought this sweater today and I found out it was produced in Bangladesh. On one hand, good, because it means somebody in Bangladesh is making money. But on the other hand, it makes me feel a bit irky, you know, labor conditions, how much money they would actually get. But I don't know where I can buy clothes for a price that I can afford with all the values attached that I would like. So to sort of conclude my thoughts, sustainability important, and it's sort of time that we jump into action. There are certain developments, like it's currently, you know, cool to be green, but this is not enough. We can definitely ignore really large world problems if we are at home because you don't get to see them, but that doesn't mean that they're not there, and it doesn't mean that they're not serious. I have no clue how to solve this, and that bothers me. I just wanted to share some of my thoughts because I think this is quite a serious issue and I want to contribute to the discussion, and I don't actually have a formulated opinion on it. But I think my opinion is that we, probably meaning governments, have to create financial incentives for companies to make good product that is recyclable, that it's made in honest conditions, that it's sort of climate neutral if possible. I think personally that there must be opportunities for companies to make money in this, and that we should really focus on that and try to sell this idea. And next to those changes in companies, we also need a lot of societal changes. For example, the value changes that I sort of mentioned, though I have no clue how to actually obtain that. Where international relations comes in, which is really complicated and people just tend to be fighting over it. It's all just really understandable, but at the same time it's ruining everything because it hampers environmental negotiations, it hampers trade negotiations, it hampers the financial sector. So many things are going wrong. And in the meantime, there are still people starving. What bugs me is that I really want to be realistic. I just don't see a way how we could solve that. And that seems very illogical at the same time. I just wish there was a way to let everybody see the need to step over that, or come up with an idea that could make everybody happy, but I don't see that happening really soon. If you have any really cool ideas on how to save the planet, please let me know, because that would be really helpful. And I promise I will talk about lighter subjects tomorrow.